Kurdish-led forces have withdrawn from the northern Syrian town of Ras al-Ain, apparently in line with the terms of a deal between the U.S. and Turkey. A convoy of ambulances carrying wounded civilians and Kurdish fighters was seen leaving the area on Sunday. Ankara wants to establish a so-called safe zone in the region and demands Kurdish forces withdraw completely. Turkey agreed to pause fighting in the area last week to allow their departure. That truce is set to run out on Tuesday. And in just a moment, we will speak with Andreas Nick, a Turkey expert and member of the German Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee. But first, our next report takes a look at the contested area for this proposed safe zone.
Some of the fiercest fighting against the so-called Islamic State happened in Syria along Turkey's border. Kurdish fighters helped turn the tide with the battle for Kobani, which has since become one of the main Kurdish centers. For Turkey, that's a provocation. It considers Kurdish forces an existential threat.
With regard to the establishment of a safe zone, our aim was for the area to be cleaned of terrorists. As a result of our president's skilled leadership, we got what we wanted in the negotiations.
The area is a fertile plain that once grew the grain that fed much of Syria. About 1.7 million Kurds live here, along with 500,000 Syrian Arabs and others. But the area is also home to thousands of IS prisoners, guarded by Kurds at several sites. Turkey is reportedly guaranteed they won't break out, though at least one small-scale prison break has already happened. Meanwhile, more than 150,000 people have been forced to leave their homes by the fighting. They don't know what's next.
I'm very happy about the ceasefire. I hope all citizens return to the country. But for the time being, I won't return until security is established in Syria. Then we'll go back.
But with Turkish forces and pro-Turkey Syrian fighters massing in their cities, returning here is unlikely for the Kurds. Turkey plans to resettle more than 1 million refugees here, mainly Syrians originally from elsewhere in the country.
And I am joined now by Andreas Nick, CDU member of the Bundestag and Foreign Affairs Committee and the CDU-CSU Parliamentary Group spokesperson for Turkey. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to begin by asking you, because the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says that Turkey's operation against those Kurdish forces in northern Syria is a violation of international law. Given that, what action should Germany be willing to take?
I think it is clear that there is no justification under international law for this military operation. It is not covered, I think, under immediate self-defense. It is politically and militarily risky. I think we have taken this to the UN Security Council last week. We had a debate here in Parliament. We have initiated some action on the on the EU level with regard to military procurement issues to Turkey. But I think we should avoid the temptation of just focusing on punishing Turkey. We should look for solutions to the region. And I think the ceasefire that has been agreed at least is an initial first step on which we should build further.
But Mr. Nick, is that enough? Because, I mean, last week, President Erdogan, he called the German foreign minister a political amateur. Erdogan doesn't listen to what Berlin has to say, does he?
Well, I think there is a specific political rhetoric in the bilateral relations, which I think emerges to the front every now and then. I think, from my experience, we will be able to influence Turkish behavior the more and the better if we are seen as also having a realistic view and an acknowledgement of Turkey's legitimate security interests and of Turkey's contribution with regard to hosting 4 million refugees. I think if that's a starting point, you can also have a more tangible and more targeted conversation on what should be done. And some of that is better done behind closed doors than via megaphone diplomacy.
Meantime, you know, we have the situation on the ground, the dynamic dramatically shifting. We have Russia, Syria, Turkey, really now the key players after U.S. troops pulled out of northern Syria. And I'm curious to hear how you see the shifting dynamic and potentially a changing role for Europe.
I think clearly what has happening has first and foremost strengthened the role of the Assad regime. It has strengthened the role of Russia in Syria. The potential for the EU to contribute to a solution so far is rather limited. I think if the chance is there to extend the ceasefire further and give room for political agreement, political solution on what should be done, this would require at some point not only an agreement with Russia, but probably also a mandate from the UN Security Council. The EU should be willing to make a constructive contribution to create a buffer zone that would stop military violence for a more sustained period. But I think the stakes on this are high. It would require a broad agreement with Syrian government, with Russia, and it would probably at some point also require the willingness of EU countries to commit peace troops to this region, which I think would be a major challenge.
But that's wishful thinking, isn't it? I mean, what if the ceasefire is not extended? Because Turkey has only agreed to a pause in fighting for 5 days. How concerned are you about what will happen to the Kurds in the area when it runs out on Tuesday?
I think that's I think why the top priority needs to be to extend that ceasefire. I think we should keep all options open on increasing pressure on Turkey. But on the other hand, I think any solution will require to also take into account Turkey's legitimate interest and to do everything we can to maintain Turkey's alliance with the West, with NATO, and with positive relations with the European Union. I think pushing Turkey out of that and pushing Turkey even closer towards Russia or China is not helpful and will also not contribute to solving the issue in Syria.
Andreas Nick, member of the German Bundestag Foreign Affairs Committee, thank you so much for speaking with us here on DW.
Thank you.